If you want your children to see another century, do not attack Earth. The voice was old, calm, and steady. It should have stopped the vote. Instead, it made the room laugh. The Grand Assembly chamber hung above the clouds of Aurelian Prime like a jewel suspended in sunlight. Thousands of delegates filled the circular hall, representing worlds scattered across half the galaxy. Some wore living robes woven from bioluminescent organisms. Others sat inside transparent aquatic chambers. At the center of it all stood High Executor Kaler Voss, leader of the Dominion, the most powerful military alliance in known space. He waited patiently for the laughter to fade. Then he smiled. "Esteemed delegates," he said, spreading his hands. "You see why progress remains difficult. Every era has its relics." More laughter followed. Not cruel laughter. Worse, dismissive laughter. The kind reserved for someone people had already decided no longer mattered. Seated near the highest tier of the chamber was Elian Thorn. He did not react. He simply rested both hands on the polished black cane beside him and watched the room. Nobody knew exactly how old Elian was. Some records claimed 12,000 years. Others suggested far more. Entire civilizations had risen and vanished during his lifetime. Most species treated him like a living museum piece, something to honor during ceremonies and ignore during decisions. Kaler turned toward him. "You have shared your warning, Elder Thorn. We appreciate your concern." The smile never left his face. But Earth is not some mythical force. It is a trade partner, a regional power, nothing more. Several delegates nodded. The data seemed obvious. Earth controlled only a modest portion of explored space. Human fleets were rarely seen. Their military spending remained surprisingly low compared to neighboring powers. They negotiated. They traded. They avoided conflict whenever possible. By every measurable standard, humanity looked cautious, predictable, small. "You are making the same mistake they made," Elian said quietly. The translation systems carried his voice across the massive chamber. For the first time, the room grew slightly quieter. Kaler folded his arms. "And who exactly is they?" Elian looked toward the enormous transparent ceiling above them. Beyond it, distant stars glittered against the darkness. His eyes reflected those stars in a way that made him seem impossibly tired. People whose names no longer exist. A few delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Kaler noticed it and immediately stepped forward. "Fear is not evidence," he declared. "Stories are not strategy." Applause rolled through portions of the chamber. The momentum shifted back in his favor. Across the room, screens displayed the proposal waiting for approval. Dominion fleets would enter the Sol sector. Earth would surrender control of several critical trade corridors. Compliance would be mandatory. Refusal would trigger enforcement measures. Simple, legal, clean. Kaler glanced at the vote count. The outcome was already certain. "The galaxy cannot be governed by ancient ghosts," he said. "We move forward." The voting sequence began. Lights flashed across hundreds of stations. One by one, governments cast their support. Green indicators multiplied around the chamber. Near the rear section, a young historian named Dr. Lena Hart watched in silence. She had spent years studying fragments of forgotten galactic history. Something about Elian's warning bothered her. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. There had been no anger, no drama, no attempt to persuade. Only certainty. The kind of certainty people usually carried after surviving something terrible. The final vote appeared above the assembly floor. Approved. Cheers erupted throughout the chamber. Kaler raised both arms as cameras focused on him. Another political victory. Another expansion. Another demonstration of Dominion strength. Yet Elian remained seated, unmoving, unimpressed. As delegates celebrated around him, Lena found herself staring at the old being instead of the victor. Finally, Kaler looked down one last time. "Any final words, Elder?" The chamber settled into an expectant silence. Elian slowly rose to his feet. His movements were careful, almost fragile. But when he spoke, every voice disappeared. "Yes." He paused. "History is about to happen again." Then he turned and walked toward the exit. No speech, no explanation, no threat, just those 7 words. The massive doors closed behind him with a low metallic sound. For reasons Lena could not explain, that sound felt far louder than the applause that followed. By the time the celebration ended, Elian Thorn was already gone. Most delegates never gave him another thought. They returned to their receptions, interviews, and victory dinners. To them, the matter was settled. The Dominion had won. Earth would comply. Life would move on. But Dr. Lena Hart could not let it go. 3 hours after the vote, she found herself standing inside the oldest archive on Aurelian Prime. The building sat beneath the Capital District, buried nearly 200 feet underground. It smelled faintly of dust, machine oil, and aging paper. Real paper. The kind people stopped using thousands of years ago. Lena walked between endless shelves illuminated by soft amber lights. Her research badge granted access to restricted historical records, but not many people used those privileges anymore. Most historians preferred convenient summaries generated by modern systems. Lena preferred originals. Original records had a habit of revealing uncomfortable truths. She stopped in front of an ancient terminal and entered a search request. Ilian Thorn. The screen immediately returned more than 80,000 references. She frowned. That was impossible. No single individual should appear that often across recorded history. She narrowed the search. Major conflicts. Civilizational collapses. Extinction events. The number remained staggering. Every time a powerful empire disappeared from history, Ilian seemed to be there. Watching. Recording. Surviving. What exactly are you? She whispered. A voice behind her answered. That is usually the wrong question. Lena nearly jumped out of her chair. She turned to find Ilian standing in the aisle behind her. The old being carried the same black cane and wore the same simple gray robes from the assembly. You should ask what I remember. Lena exhaled slowly. You followed me? No, Ilian said. I come here every week. He glanced around the archive. Most people forget these records exist. Lena looked back toward the screen. Were you telling the truth? Ilian stepped closer. About what? The civilizations that vanished. For several seconds he did not answer. His eyes moved across the rows of shelves as if he could see decades hidden inside them. Finally he nodded. Every word. Lena folded her arms. The Dominion believes Earth is a manageable problem. The Dominion believes many things. And you disagree. A faint smile crossed his face. I disagree with certainty. He slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair. The movement looked careful, almost painful. For the first time, Lena was reminded that even someone who survived 12,000 years still carried the weight of age. Tell me something, she said. What happened to those civilizations? Ilian remained silent long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then he reached into his robe and removed a small metallic object no larger than a coin. Its surface was worn smooth with age. He placed it on the table between them. This was recovered from the ruins of the Orinth Dominion. Lena recognized the name immediately. Every student did. The Orinths had once controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Then they disappeared. The official records say their economy collapsed. Ilian chuckled softly. Official records say many things. Lena picked up the coin. Strange symbols covered its surface. One symbol immediately caught her attention. It looked familiar. Very familiar. Her eyes widened. Wait. She turned the coin over. The same symbol appeared again. That cannot be right. What do you see? Ilian asked. Lena swallowed. That is Terran. The old being nodded. Yes. But this coin is supposed to be 7,000 years old. It is. Lena stared at him. Human civilization was not even spacefaring back then. Ilian's expression darkened. That, he said quietly, is exactly what everyone keeps assuming. Edit. The first thing High Executor Kaler Voss did the next morning was order a full intelligence review of Earth. Not because he was worried. Quite the opposite. He wanted proof. Proof that the old stories were nonsense. Proof that the concerns spreading through certain corners of the assembly were nothing more than superstition wrapped in history. Inside Dominion Strategic Command, a dozen analysts stood before a wall-sized display filled with data streams. Population figures, trade reports, fleet inventories, economic projections. Everything pointed in the same direction. Earth was stable, prosperous, predictable. One analyst tapped a control panel. Human military expenditures have remained flat for 73 years. Another highlighted a chart. Expansion activity is minimal. They have not annexed a single neighboring system in over a century. A third brought up fleet records. Confirmed active combat vessels remain significantly below Dominion numbers. Kaler listened with growing satisfaction. This was what reality looked like. Numbers. Evidence. Facts. not ghost stories from forgotten ages. And their leadership? He asked. A photograph appeared above the table. President Nathan Cole looked more like a retired professor than the leader of a major interstellar power. Gray hair, calm eyes, plain dark suit. No medals, no ceremonial armor, no dramatic titles. Former naval officer, the analyst explained. Known for diplomatic restraint. Approval ratings remain unusually high. Kaler smirked. A politician. A popular one. That makes him even more predictable. Across the galaxy, nearly 60 light-years away, Nathan Cole sat at a wooden dining table overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. Morning sunlight reflected off the water outside his window. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside a tablet displaying overnight reports. His daughter leaned against the kitchen counter eating breakfast. "You are working again," she said. Nathan glanced up. "I am drinking coffee." While reading classified updates. Details. She laughed softly and shook her head. The exchange felt ordinary. Comfortable. Human. Nothing about the scene suggested the leader of Earth was facing a growing confrontation with the most powerful alliance in known space. A secure notification appeared on the tablet. Nathan read it once and set the device face down. His daughter noticed. Bad news. Not yet. That sounds suspiciously like bad news. Nathan smiled. It usually does. Several hours later, deep beneath the Capitol complex in Geneva, senior advisors gathered around a conference table. The atmosphere was serious, but not panicked. No emergency alerts. No raised voices. Nathan entered carrying a folder and took his seat. "Status?" he asked. Admiral Rebecca Hayes answered first. "Dominion reconnaissance assets have increased activity around Seoul." "Expected. They believe we are weak." Nathan nodded. "Most people do." Nobody laughed. The room remained quiet. Finally, a younger advisor spoke. "Should we respond publicly?" Nathan looked toward the window overlooking the city. People walked along the streets below. Families, students, office workers. Normal lives continuing uninterrupted. "No," he said. "Let them keep talking." Back on Aurelian Prime, Dr. Lena Hart stared at the ancient coin resting beneath a scanner. Every test confirmed the impossible. The material dated back 7,000 years. The Terran symbols were authentic. And hidden within archived records, she was beginning to find more examples. Small traces. Tiny fingerprints scattered across history. The deeper she searched, the stranger the pattern became. Humanity appeared everywhere. Not at the center of events. Not ruling empires. Just present. Watching. Enduring. Quietly surviving while larger powers came and went. Lena slowly leaned back in her chair. For the first time, a question formed that she could not shake. What if the galaxy had not underestimated Earth because humans were good at hiding their strength? What if humanity had spent thousands of years deliberately teaching everyone to look the wrong way? Edit. 3 days later, the first Dominion task force crossed into the outer edge of the Sol sector. The move was completely legal under interstellar navigation law. Officially, they were conducting a security assessment of nearby trade routes. Unofficially, everyone knew exactly what it was. Pressure. A demonstration. A reminder of who held power. News networks across the galaxy covered the deployment around the clock. Analysts discussed fleet tonnage, logistics capacity, and political leverage. Most reached the same conclusion. Earth would eventually give in. It was the practical choice. It was the safe choice. It was the rational choice. Inside Dominion Strategic Command, High Executor Kaler Voss stood before a massive holographic map. Blue markers representing his ships advanced steadily toward key transit corridors near Seoul. Everything was proceeding according to plan. "Any response?" he asked. An intelligence officer shook her head. "None." Kaler smiled. "Public statements?" "None." "Military mobilization?" "Nothing significant." The room relaxed. Several officers exchanged satisfied looks. One of them finally said what everyone was thinking. "They know they cannot win." Kaler nodded slowly. That is usually how reality works. Thousands of miles away on Earth, reality looked very different. President Nathan Cole sat on the back porch of a modest waterfront home overlooking the bay. A cool breeze drifted across the water. Seagulls circled above the docks. The setting felt so normal that it almost seemed disconnected from the growing tension filling the galaxy. Nathan was grilling burgers for his family when his secure communicator vibrated. His daughter glanced at him. "Work?" "Unfortunately." You always say unfortunately. Because it is always unfortunate. She smiled while handing him a plate. Nathan stepped aside and opened the message. Admiral Rebecca Hayes appeared on the screen. The Dominion Task Force has entered the projected zone. Nathan took a slow breath. Any incidents? None. Good. Rebecca studied him for a moment. You do realize they are expecting a reaction. I know. And we are not giving them one. Nathan looked out toward the water. Several small sailboats drifted peacefully across the bay. No, why? For a few seconds he remained silent. When he finally answered, his voice was calm. Because panic is expensive. Rebecca laughed despite herself. That sounds like something your grandfather would have said. He did. The call ended. Nathan returned to the grill and flipped a burger as if nothing had happened. Yet beneath that ordinary moment sat a truth very few people understood. He was not calm because he believed there was no danger. He was calm because he understood exactly how much danger existed. Across the stars, Dr. Lena Hart continued digging through forgotten archives. Sleep had become optional. Her office was buried beneath stacks of records and projected documents. The deeper she searched, the stranger the pattern became. Ancient governments disappeared. Human references remained. Major economic collapses occurred. Human references remained. Entire civilizations fractured into history. Human references remained. Never leading. Never conquering. Always present. As if humanity had mastered the art of standing in the background while history unfolded around them. Late that night, Lena found another record. This one forced her to sit upright. It was a transcript nearly 6,000 years old. Most of it was damaged beyond recovery. Only one sentence remained readable. She stared at it for nearly a minute. Then she immediately opened a secure channel to Elian Thorne. When his face appeared, she did not bother with greetings. I found something. The old being looked tired. What did you find? Lena swallowed. A warning. Elian said nothing. It mentions Earth. The silence stretched longer. Finally, he asked a question that made her skin crawl. How old is the document? Lena checked the timestamp. 5,812 years. Elian slowly closed his eyes. Then they found it too. Edit. The message reached Dominion Strategic Command less than 12 hours later. Nobody knew exactly who leaked the archive fragment, but suddenly every intelligence office in the core worlds was discussing the same sentence. The damaged document contained only one complete warning. Do not mistake their silence for weakness. That was it. No author. No explanation. No context. Just a sentence preserved for nearly 6,000 years. High Executor Kaler Voss stared at the report and laughed. Several officers joined him. This is what has everyone nervous? He asked. One line from a broken record? An intelligence director cleared his throat. There is concern because similar references are appearing in other archives. Old myths appear everywhere. Kaler tossed the report onto the table. Find me facts, not ghost stories. Meanwhile, the Dominion Task Force continued deeper into the Outer Soul Transit Network. The operation remained peaceful. No weapons were activated. No threats were exchanged. Yet something felt wrong. Commander Yarrick Talon sat aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn reviewing navigation data when a technician frowned at her console. Sir, I am seeing signal drift. Yarrick looked up. How much? Less than 1%. That is normal. Not here. She enlarged the display. The beacon network is correcting itself before the error fully develops. Yarrick studied the screen. The correction happened so quickly that most systems would never notice it. The network seemed almost alive, constantly adjusting tiny variables before they became problems. Probably automated maintenance, he said. That is what I thought. The technician hesitated. Except nobody can identify who maintains it. Back on Earth, Nathan Cole sat in a secure conference room beneath Geneva. A large display showed the position of every Dominion vessel approaching the region. Around the table, military advisors waited for instructions. Admiral Rebecca Hayes finally broke the silence. We can intercept them whenever you decide. Nathan shook his head. No, they are mapping our infrastructure. Let them. They are testing boundaries. Nathan nodded. That is what nervous people do. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. You are unusually calm today. Nathan looked toward the display. Hundreds of blue markers drifted across the map. My grandfather used to own a farm. The room exchanged confused glances. One summer a neighbor ignored every warning about a broken fence. Said the animals would never wander far enough to cause trouble. A few people smiled. They knew a story was coming. What happened? Nathan asked. The animals found exactly the place they should not have been. Rebecca laughed softly. And Nathan folded his hands. The fence was never the important part. The room fell quiet. Several advisors understood immediately. Across the galaxy, Lena Hart met Elian Thorne again inside the archive. She placed dozens of newly recovered records across a projection table. Different eras, different civilizations, different languages. Yet all of them shared one thing. Warnings. Not threats. Warnings. Lena looked up. How many times has this happened? Elian stared at the floating documents. His expression carried a sadness that seemed older than entire worlds. More than you would believe. Lena felt a chill run through her. And every time they ignored it, Elian nodded slowly. Then he looked directly at her. Every single time. Edit. For the next 48 hours, Dr. Lena Hart barely left the archive. Every lead she followed opened 3 more questions. The deeper she dug, the less humanity resembled the young civilization described in modern textbooks. It was not that the records proved humans ruled ancient galaxies. They did not. In fact, the opposite seemed true. Humanity appeared to have spent thousands of years avoiding the spotlight. That was what unsettled her. Most powerful civilizations left monuments. Human traces looked more like fingerprints on glass. Easy to miss unless someone knew where to look. Around midnight, Lena finally found a reference hidden inside a damaged economic treaty from nearly 4,000 years earlier. She stared at the recovered text and immediately contacted Elian. The old being arrived less than an hour later. He looked exhausted. You found another one, he said. Lena nodded and projected the document into the air between them. Read the highlighted section. Elian studied the words. His expression did not change. You already knew this existed. I suspected. Lena pointed at the line. It says the collapse of the Varellan Compact began after they severed access to Terran infrastructure. Elian remained silent. Nobody teaches this, she continued. Every history record claims their collapse was caused by political corruption. Political corruption was involved. Then why is this hidden? For several seconds the old being simply watched the floating text. Finally he answered. Because nobody wanted to admit how dependent they had become. Across the stars, aboard the Dominion flagship Resolute Dawn, Commander Yarrick Talon faced a different mystery. Reports had started arriving from ships throughout the task force. Nothing serious. Nothing dramatic. Small problems. Annoying problems. Navigation systems required unusual recalibration. Communication relays experienced unexplained delays. Supply forecasts contained tiny discrepancies that should not have existed. Separately, each issue looked insignificant. Together, they created a growing sense of unease. Yarrick reviewed the reports with his senior staff. Tell me the common factor. An operations officer shook her head. We cannot find one. There is always a common factor. Not this time. Another officer leaned forward. Sir, it feels like the network itself is resisting us. Several people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Yarrick frowned. Networks do not resist. Yet even as he said it, he was no longer completely convinced. On Earth, Nathan Cole sat alone in his office overlooking Lake Geneva. The city lights reflected across the water outside. His desk contained only a few printed reports and a framed photograph of his family. Nothing about the room suggested extraordinary power. A soft chime interrupted the silence. Admiral Rebecca Hayes appeared on a secure display. The pressure campaign continues, she said. Nathan nodded. I expected that. There is something else. Go ahead. Rebecca hesitated. Several foreign observers are beginning to ask questions. Nathan smiled faintly. About time. Should we answer them? He looked out the window again. No, still no. Especially no. Rebecca laughed. You really enjoy making people nervous. Not people, Nathan said quietly. Assumptions. After the call ended, he opened a small encrypted file stored deep within the system. The document contained only a single sentence. He read it once, then closed it again. Humanity had not hidden the truth because it was ashamed. Humanity had hidden it because every civilization that learned too much eventually made the same mistake. And somewhere beyond Earth, that mistake was already happening again. Edit. The first call came from Commander Yarrick Talon at 3:17 in the morning ship time. By noon there had been 23 more. None of them reported attacks. None reported sabotage. That was what made the situation so frustrating. Every system technically worked. Every ship remained operational. Yet the Dominion task force was slowing down. Tiny delays multiplied everywhere. Cargo transfers that normally required 15 minutes now took 20. Navigation updates arrived a few seconds late. Maintenance schedules drifted out of alignment. Crew productivity dropped without anyone understanding why. Yarrick stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn staring at another report. Tell me again why a fleet this size is struggling to maintain basic coordination. The communications officer rubbed her forehead. Because every support network we rely on keeps rerouting traffic. Through whose authority? We do not know. Yarrick looked around the bridge. Nobody had answers. The uncertainty bothered him more than any visible threat could have. Problems could be solved. Unknowns were harder. On Aurelian Prime, High Executor Kaler Voss remained publicly confident. During an interview with Galactic News Network, he dismissed the growing concerns. Temporary logistical adjustments are normal during large deployments, he said. The operation remains fully under control. The reporter nodded. And the historical records surfacing throughout the archives? Kaler smiled politely. History is full of stories. Strategy is built on facts. The interview spread across the galaxy within hours. Most viewers accepted his explanation. A few did not. Among them was Dr. Lena Hart. She sat across from Elian Thorne inside the archive as another collection of recovered documents floated between them. They keep repeating the same mistake, she said quietly. Elian nodded. That is what civilizations do. Even after warnings? Especially after warnings. Lena frowned. I do not understand. The old being leaned back in his chair. When people hear a warning often enough, they stop hearing it at all. For a moment neither spoke. Then Lena activated another file. This one contained a map. Thousands of years old. Entire star nations marked across regions that no longer existed. One symbol appeared again and again near critical trade routes. The same Terran symbol she had found on the ancient coin. Every major transit system, she whispered. Every major economic corridor. Elian simply watched her reach the conclusion herself. Lena looked up. Humanity helped build them. Yes. Not recently. No, thousands of years ago. Elian nodded once. The realization hit her harder than she expected. The modern galaxy depended on infrastructure so old that nobody even remembered who created it. Meanwhile, on Earth, Nathan Cole walked alone along the shoreline near his home after sunset. The waves rolled gently against the rocks. The air smelled of salt and rain. His communicator remained silent for once. No meetings. No briefings. Just a rare moment of peace. Then footsteps approached behind him. Admiral Rebecca Hayes joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. You always come here when something important is about to happen. Nathan accepted the cup. Do I? Every single time. He smiled. That obvious? To people who know you. Rebecca looked out over the dark water. The Dominion still believes they are in control. Nathan followed her gaze toward the horizon. Most people believe they are in control right before they discover they are not. Rebecca studied him carefully. How much longer? Nathan took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Not long. Far across the stars, another report arrived on Commander Yarrick Talon's desk. He read the first line twice before standing up. Several major transit beacons near the task force had quietly changed access permissions. Nobody knew who authorized the update. Nobody knew how it happened. And for the first time since entering the Sol sector, Yarrick felt something he had not felt before. Not fear. Not yet. But the unmistakable feeling that someone else had been running the system all along. Edit. Commander Yarrick Talon did not sleep that night. He remained on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, watching reports arrive one after another. None of them described a crisis. That was the problem. Crises were obvious. Crises had causes. What he was seeing felt more like an invisible hand quietly rearranging the foundation beneath his fleet. By sunrise ship time, 3 additional transit beacons had updated their permissions. Several logistical hubs no longer recognized Dominion priority access. Supply requests that once moved instantly were now routed through layers of verification protocols nobody remembered creating. Yarrick stood beside the central display. Who owns these systems? He asked. Silence answered him. Finally, a systems officer spoke. Officially, the Galactic Infrastructure Authority. And who built them? Another uncomfortable silence followed. We do not know. On Aurelian Prime, High Executor Kaler Voss received the same reports and reacted exactly as everyone expected. He dismissed them. Administrative interference, he said. Nothing more. Yet even as he spoke, another advisor entered the room carrying a data slate. Sir, there is something else. Kaler sighed. What now? Several economic corridors have shifted routing preferences. Toward whom? The advisor hesitated. Earth. Kaler stared at him. That is impossible. We checked 3 times. Across the galaxy, financial markets had begun reacting to changes nobody fully understood. Shipping companies quietly altered routes. Insurance networks updated risk assessments. Freight schedules adjusted automatically. No government had ordered the changes. No emergency declarations had been issued. The systems simply responded as if they recognized a reality hidden from everyone else. Dr. Lena Hart watched the developments unfold from the archive. Her research had finally reached a point where the pattern could no longer be ignored. She sat across from Elian Thorne with hundreds of recovered records floating above the table. Ancient treaties, navigation maps, infrastructure blueprints, economic agreements. Every path led back to the same conclusion. Humanity had never controlled the galaxy. Humanity had built much of the framework that allowed the galaxy to function. They do not even know, Lena whispered. Most of them genuinely do not know. Elian nodded. Generations passed. Records were lost. Assumptions replaced memory. Lena looked up. How much of the current network originated with Earth? The old being gave a tired smile. Enough. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Meanwhile, Nathan Cole arrived at a secure conference room beneath Geneva. The atmosphere inside was calm. No alarms. No panic. Several advisors reviewed incoming reports while Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood near the main display. She looked toward Nathan as he entered. The changes are accelerating. Nathan took his seat. Expected. The Dominion is beginning to notice. Also expected. Rebecca folded her arms. You knew this would happen. Nathan looked around the room. We all knew. One younger advisor finally asked the question nobody else wanted to voice. Why now? Nathan was quiet for several seconds. Then he answered. Because they crossed a line. A military line? No, he shook his head. A trust line. The room fell silent. Beyond Earth, across hundreds of worlds, systems continued adjusting themselves. Access privileges shifted. Routing priorities changed. Long-forgotten protocols quietly woke from centuries of dormancy. Nobody had fired a shot. Nobody had issued a threat. Yet for the first time, powerful people throughout the galaxy began asking a question that should have been asked thousands of years earlier. What if humanity had never been standing inside the system at all? What if humanity had been the reason the system existed? Edit. The emergency summit lasted less than 30 minutes. That alone told the galaxy everything it needed to know. For weeks, the Dominion had projected confidence. For weeks, officials insisted every disruption was temporary, every anomaly explainable, every warning exaggerated. Now their representatives sat across from Earth requesting negotiations. Not demanding, requesting. High Executor Kaler Voss appeared by secure transmission from Aurelian Prime. He looked older than he had only days before. Not physically, emotionally, like a man discovering that the map he trusted his entire life had been incomplete. President Nathan Cole joined from Geneva. No dramatic stage. No military backdrop. Just a quiet office overlooking the lake. Kaler studied him for several seconds before speaking. How long? Nathan tilted his head slightly. How long what? How long has humanity controlled these systems? Nathan smiled faintly. We do not control them. That is not what the evidence says. The evidence says we built parts of them. Kaler leaned forward. Why hide that? The answer came immediately. Because power changes people. Silence settled over the connection. Across countless worlds, billions watched the exchange. Nathan folded his hands on the desk. Every civilization eventually reaches the same crossroads. Some decide that because they can dominate others, they should. Humanity learned that lesson a very long time ago. Kaler shook his head. You expect me to believe an entire species voluntarily stepped back from power? No, Nathan replied. I expect you to believe we learned what power costs. For the first time, Kaler had no response. Hours later, the Dominion formally withdrew its pressure campaign. Transit permissions were restored. Trade corridors stabilized. Fleet movements slowed. The crisis ended not with a battle, but with a realization. And somehow that made the outcome feel larger. Deep within the archive, Dr. Lena Hart sat beside Elian Thorne one final time. The old being looked out through a narrow window toward the stars. "It is over," Lena said. Elian nodded. "For now." She laughed softly. "You always say things like that. Because history always continues." Lena studied him carefully. "There is one thing I still do not understand. Only one. Why did humanity never tell the galaxy the truth?" Elian remained quiet for a long moment. Then he pointed toward the stars beyond the glass. "Look out there." Lena did. Endless lights stretched across the darkness. Worlds, civilizations, families, lives, dreams. Every one of those lights belongs to someone who believes tomorrow will come, Elian said softly. The strongest people are not the ones who make everyone afraid. They are the ones who create a future where nobody needs to be afraid. Lena felt the weight of those words settle inside her. The old being stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "Most civilizations want to be remembered for their victories." He smiled. Humanity chose to be remembered for its restraint. Several months later, life across the galaxy returned to normal. Markets recovered. Trade resumed. Politicians argued about new regulations. News networks moved on to fresher stories. Yet one recording continued circulating from world to world. It was only 7 words long. 7 simple words spoken by an old witness who had seen entire ages rise and fall. History is about to happen again. People repeated those words because they finally understood what they meant. History was never the story of who had the biggest fleet or the loudest voice. History belonged to those who knew when not to use their strength. And somewhere on a quiet shoreline overlooking the water, Nathan Cole watched the sunset with his family, grateful that the greatest victory of all was the one nobody had to fight for.